540 United States Marines, surrounded in a valley kill zone, ammunition down to final magazines. 3 ridgelines pouring fire. The command center paralyzed by regulations. The casualty list already being typed. But one person refused to accept it. The 38-year-old A-10 pilot they'd pushed aside as past her prime. She'd been quiet for 16 years. Watching, waiting, preparing. This is Captain Nora Blackwell, callsign Viper 7. The woman who rewrote the rulebook when the rulebook failed 540 lives. Northern Afghanistan, October 2007, 72 hours before the ambush that would change everything. The sun hadn't broken the horizon yet. Forward operating base Blackthorn sat in darkness, generators humming their perpetual song guard towers silhouetted against the sky turning from black to deep purple. The air tasted of dust and diesel fuel. It always did. On the flight line, one figure moved alone. Captain Nora Blackwell walked the tarmac with the deliberate pace of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Her boots made soft sounds against concrete still cool from the night. Flight suit zipped to her collar. Helmet bag slung over one shoulder. Kneeboard in her left hand already covered in her neat handwriting. She stopped beside her aircraft. A 10C Warthog. Tail number 81-0964. 26 years old, just like her service record. Ugly as original sin. Beautiful as salvation. The Warthog sat low and wide, twin turbofans mounted high on the fuselage away from debris and dust. Titanium bathtub cockpit, GAU-8 Avenger cannon protruding from the nose like an accusation. 6 hardpoints under the wings currently loaded with AGM-65D Mavericks and in practice rounds. Nora ran her hand along the leading edge of the port wing. Metal cool under her palm. She'd flown this exact airframe in Desert Storm, 16 years ago. Different paint job, same soul. She began her walk around. Port main gear struts clean tire pressure. Goodbye eye, no hydraulic leaks. She knelt, checked the brake assembly, ran her fingers along the wheel well. Everything tight. Port engine nacelle TF34GE 100 a turbofan. She peered into the intake looking for foreign object debris. Nothing. Checked the fan blades for nicks. Clean. Port wing, AGM-65. Maverick missiles secure on pylons. Safety pins in place. She traced the seeker head with one finger, careful not to scratch the optics. The GAU-8 cannon dominated the center line. Nora crouched beneath it, checking the ammunition drum access panel. 150 rounds of 30mm high-explosive incendiary loaded, each round the size of a milk bottle. The gun itself weighed more than a compact car. When it fired, the recoil slowed the aircraft mid-flight. She'd put 23 Iraqi tanks in the dirt with this weapon. February 1991. The 100-Hour War. She'd been 22 years old and furious. Starboard wing mirror check of the port side. Maverick secure. Pylon tight. Wing surface clean. Starboard engine intake clear. No leaks, fan blades, pristine. Starboard gear, good compression, no fluid loss. She completed the circuit, pulled herself up the boarding ladder, settled into the cockpit. The seat wrapped around her like a familiar handshake. Throttles fell naturally under her left hand, stick centered in her right. Rudder pedals adjusted for her height. Nora pulled out her kneeboard, 3 pages of hand-calculated data. Ballistic tables for 30mm rounds at various altitudes and temperatures. Wind drift compensation for crosswinds from 5 to 20 knots. Terrain masking angles for the valleys surrounding Blackthorn. Fuel burn rates at different airspeeds and altitudes. She'd calculated all of it by hand. Slide rule and scratch paper. No computer, no software, just math and experience. The kneeboard clipped to her thigh. She ran through instrument checks without starting engines. Attitude indicator caged properly. Altimeter set to field elevation. Heading indicator aligned. Fuel gauges reading correctly for ground state. Everything exactly where it should be. The eastern sky lightened to amber. First light touched the mountains. Nora sat in her cockpit reviewing numbers she'd already memorized and waited. She was good at waiting. The briefing room smelled of stale coffee and optimism. 700 hours, 23 officers packed into a space designed for 15. Maps covered the walls. Computer displays showed satellite imagery and drone feeds. The air conditioning struggled and failed. Nora sat in the back row, notebook open on the small desk attached to her chair, pen in hand, watching, listening, calculating. Colonel Marcus Hendricks stood at the front, pointer in hand, jaw set in what he probably thought was a command presence. 52 years old, West Point class of 1977, 25 years of service, every regulation memorized, every procedure followed. He tapped the map projection. Gentlemen and Captain Blackwell, He acknowledged her with a nod that didn't reach his eyes. Operation Ridgeline Sweep commences at 0800 tomorrow. The objective clear Kandahar Valley of remaining insurgent presence and establish permanent observation posts on the high ground. The valley appeared on the screen, a 15-kilometer gash in the mountains running roughly north-south, 2 kilometers wide at the mouth, narrowing to 800 meters at the center, steep ridges on 3 sides. Nora's hand moved across her notebook. She sketched the valley from memory, adding contour lines a satellite image didn't show. Her pen marked 3 spots: East Ridge, West Ridge, Southern Choke Point. Intelligence assessment indicates minimal enemy presence. Hendricks clicked to the next slide. Scattered elements of local militia, perhaps 20 to 30 fighters, light weapons only. Nora studied the terrain. The valley floor showed old vehicle tracks. The ridges showed nothing, which meant everything. Insurgents didn't leave traces where they planned to fight. Task organization. Hendricks listed units. Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. Golf Company, same battalion. Hotel Weapons Company for heavy guns. SEAL Team Detachment for specialized reconnaissance. Total force 540 Marines and attached personnel. 540 men, rolling into a valley that looked too perfect, too neat, too obvious. Nora raised her hand. Hendricks paused mid-sentence. His expression showed what he thought of interruptions. Captain Blackwell, question. She stood. Protocol required it when addressing the mission commander. Sir, I've flown reconnaissance over Kandahar Valley 17 times in the past 4 months. These contour lines. She pointed at the screen. They indicate interlocking fields of fire. High ground on 3 sides creates a natural kill zone. The valley narrows here. Her finger traced the choke point. 800 meters wide. If enemy forces occupy these ridges. Captain, Hendricks' voice hardened. Your reconnaissance flights are noted in the record. However, tactical ground assessment is not within your purview. Air support will be available if called. Your job is to provide that support when requested, not to question the ground tactical plan. Silence settled over the room. Officers studied their notepads. Nobody met her eyes. Hendricks continued as if she hadn't spoken. The mission timeline is aggressive but achievable. Convoy departs at 0800. Enter Valley at 0945. Establish northern positions by 1200. Sweep south and clear by 1600. Return to base by 1900. 10 hours, in and out. Nora sat down slowly. She made one more notation on her sketch. A simple calculation. Distance from valley mouth to choke point 12 kilometers. Average convoy speed in rough terrain 8 kilometers per hour. Time to reach the kill zone 90 minutes. Time to realize the trap 2 hours 40 minutes after entering the valley. Time to call for close air support on too late. She underlined those numbers twice. At the front of the room, a younger officer spoke. Lieutenant Cole Ashford, 28 years old, F-16 pilot, 4 months in theater. The kind of swagger that came from never having been shot at by someone competent. Sir, if I may. Ashford stood without waiting for acknowledgement. The A-10 platform is, well, it's outdated for modern combat. If close air support is needed, my flight can provide precision munitions from altitude. Safer, faster, more effective. He glanced back at Nora when he said it, making sure she heard. Hendricks nodded. Noted, Lieutenant. However, the A-10 has certain advantages in low-threat environments. Captain Blackwell has extensive experience with the platform. Extensive experience. The phrase hung in the air like an indictment. Ashford pressed the point. With respect, sir, extensive experience was Desert Storm. That was 16 years ago. Modern combat requires modern platforms. The A-10 is a relic. He paused. Might be time to retire it. And its drivers. Low laughter rippled through the room. Not loud, just enough to make the point. Nora kept her expression neutral. She'd heard variations of this speech for 5 years. Ever since she turned 35 and the whispers started. Too old, too slow, past her prime. Better suited for training roles. Let the young pilots have their turn. She wrote one word in her notebook. Timeline. Then she circled it 3 times. Hendricks wrapped up the briefing. Final assignments, close air support will be on standby. F-16 flight primary, a 10 secondary if needed. Captain Blackwell, you'll monitor from the Tactical Operations Center. Radio watch, coordinate air assets if called. TOC duty, the boneyard for pilots who'd outlived their usefulness. Nora closed her notebook and stood. Officers filed out, mission folders under arms, conversations about equipment and timing. The easy confidence of men who'd planned operations on maps and thought that made them ready. Colonel Hendricks stopped her at the door. Blackwell, his voice dropped to a register meant only for her. I know you have concerns, but I need you to trust the plan. These Marines are well trained, the intelligence is solid, and your role is support, not tactical decision-making. She met his eyes. Hendricks was a good man. She believed that. He followed the rules because he believed the rules kept people alive. He'd never learned that sometimes the rules were written by people who'd never been shot at. Understood, sir. You flew in Desert Storm. I respect that. But that was a different war, different enemy, different tactics. This is modern counterinsurgency. We have systems now, procedures. They work. Yes, sir. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a long day. Nora walked back to her quarters. The sun climbed higher. Heat built against the concrete barriers and plywood structures that made up FOB Blackthorn. Generators roared. Vehicles moved. Marines checked equipment and made ready. She passed the SEAL compound. Smaller, quieter. The men who moved there did so with an economy of motion that came from absolute confidence in their capabilities. One of them stood near the entrance. Commander Garrett Vaughn, 42 years old. 20 years in naval special warfare. The kind of man who'd seen things he'd never discuss and done things he'd never confirm. Their eyes met. Vaughn nodded once, a minimal gesture. But something passed in that nod. Recognition, the silent acknowledgement of people who'd been downrange when the bullets were real and the plans fell apart. Nora returned the nod and kept walking. In her quarters, she pulled out a different notebook. This one was older, the cover worn soft. The pages filled with entries spanning 16 years. She opened to a blank page and began to write. October 14th, 2007. Candelar Valley Operation. 540 Marines. Timeline 2 hours 40 minutes until kill zone activation. Probable enemy force 150 to 200 fighters. Weapons PK, M machine guns, RPG-7 possible, ZU-23. Recommended approach, low altitude gun runs, terrain masking precision, cannon fire. She drew the valley again. Marked firing positions, calculated approach angles. Then she closed the notebook and placed it on top of her flight bag. Ready. The sun climbed toward noon. Heat pressed down like a physical weight. Nora sat in the chapel. It wasn't much. A plywood structure with a cross bolted to one wall and folding chairs arranged in uneven rows. Quiet, cool in the shadows. Empty at this hour. She wasn't there to pray. She was there to remember. From her pocket, she pulled a small leather pouch. Inside, 2 dog tags on a chain. The metal worn smooth by years of handling. The stamped letters barely legible. Blackwell William R. O-24567 USMC OPUS Methodist. Her father's tags. The ones he'd worn through 3 deployments. Vietnam, Beirut, the first Gulf War. The ones the Marines had given her when they informed her of his death. Colonel William Blackwell, United States Marine Corps. Dead at 52 in a training accident that should never have happened. May 1998, 9 years ago, the wound still fresh. Nora remembered the phone call. She'd been at Nellis Air Force Base, instructor pilot duty, teaching young aviators how to employ the GAU-8 without killing friendlies. The call came at 0300, a voice she didn't know, formal, apologetic, training exercise, low-level flight, bad weather. The flight lead had called for abort, ordered everyone to climb to safety altitude, but the mission commander safe in a command post on the ground overruled, told them to press on. The weather would clear. It didn't clear. William Blackwell, following orders he knew were wrong, had flown into a mountain at 200 knots. They found the wreckage 3 days later. Among his personal effects, a letter, sealed, addressed to his daughter. Nora had read it once, memorized it, never looked at it again. But she heard his voice now, sitting in the chapel holding his tags. Nora, if you're reading this, then I made a choice I knew was wrong and paid the price. I'm writing this because I don't want you to make the same mistake. In our profession, we follow orders. It's the foundation of everything. Discipline, chain of command, trust and leadership. Without those things, chaos. But here's what they don't teach you in flight school. Sometimes the orders are wrong. Sometimes the people giving them don't have all the information. Sometimes they're thinking about politics or careers or covering their asses instead of bringing everyone home alive. When that happens, you have a choice. Follow the order and hope for the best. Or trust your training, trust your instincts, and do what you know is right. I've spent my whole career choosing the first option. Following orders even when my gut screamed they were wrong, it kept me safe, kept my career on track, made me a good Marine. But if you're reading this, it got me killed. So here's my last piece of advice. When doctrine conflicts with reality, choose reality. When the rulebook says one thing but your training and experience say another, trust yourself. Lives matter more than careers. Getting your people home matters more than getting your next promotion. Do what's right. Accept the consequences. Sleep well at night. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry I won't be there to see what you become. Dad. Nora closed her fist around the dog tags, the metal edges pressed into her palm. She'd carried that letter with her for 9 years. Carried the weight of those words. Carried the knowledge that her father had known in some way that his obedience would kill him. And he'd done it anyway. She would not make the same mistake. From another pocket, she pulled a second item, a small black notebook, his final flight log. She opened it to the last entry, May 16th, 1998, his handwriting. Neat and precise. Weather below minimums. Visibility less than 1 mile. Ceiling 300 feet. Recommended aboard. Order to continue. Proceeding against judgment. The last words her father ever wrote. Nora traced the letters with one finger. She joined the Marines after his death. Not Air Force like him. Marines, ground truth, the sharp end of the spear. She wanted to understand what he'd died for. Wanted to see if the institution was worth the sacrifice. She'd found good people, found brotherhood, found purpose. But she'd also found the same thing that killed her father. The same rigid adherence to procedure. The same unwillingness to question authority. The same assumption that the people at the top knew better than the people at the sharp end. And she'd made a promise standing over his grave at Arlington watching them fold the flag. She would never follow an order that would get people killed. Not ever. Not for career. Not for reputation. Not for anything. If it came down to a choice between the rulebook and reality, she'd choose reality. Every time. She'd just been waiting for the moment that required that choice. Sitting in the chapel dog tags in one hand, flight log in the other, Nora had the cold certainty that the moment was coming. Tomorrow. Candelar Valley. 540 Marines rolling into a kill zone while colonels and lieutenants debated regulations. She clipped the dog tags to the inner lining of her flight vest, tucked the flight log into her kneeboard next to her ballistic tables. Then she stood and walked back into the sunlight. Dawn came too fast and too slow at the same time. 0600 hours. The motor pool roared with activity, diesel engines coughing to life, Marines loading gear, squad leaders checking equipment, platoon sergeants shouting over the noise, 540 men preparing to roll. Nora stood near the TOC, watching. Helmet bag at her feet, flight suit already soaked with sweat despite the early hour. The sun wasn't up yet, but the heat was building. The convoy formed in the staging area. Oshkosh M-ATVS in the lead. MRAP vehicles in the center carrying the bulk of the infantry, heavy gun trucks at intervals. Logistics vehicles at the rear, Echo Company, Golf Company, hotel weapons, the 2nd Battalion 5th Marine Regiment, young men with old eyes, some on their first deployment, some on their 4th. All of them volunteers, all of them professionals. She watched them check weapons, adjust body armor, trade jokes to cut the tension, the universal rituals of warriors before battle. Near the SEAL compound, a smaller group prepared. Commander Garrett Vaughn and his team, 12 men total, moving with the quiet efficiency of operators who'd done this 100 times. No wasted motion, no unnecessary talk. Vaughn walked past her position. He stopped. For a moment, they stood 5 feet apart. 2 veterans, 2 people who'd seen the gap between the plan and reality. Vaughn's eyes moved to her flight suit, to the wings on her chest, to the name tape. Blackwell. His voice carried to the gravel of 1,000 missions. Commander, you flying today, TOC duty. Something flickered in his expression. Disappointment, maybe? Or recognition that the Air Force was making the same mistake the Navy had made with its own senior operators. Sidelining experience in favor of youth. That's a waste, he said it quietly, without judgment, just fact. It's the assignment. Vaughn nodded slowly, then he extended his hand. Nora shook it. His grip was firm, calloused. The hand of a man who'd carried heavy loads in hard places. If things go sideways. He left the sentence unfinished. They won't need me. She met his eyes. You've got this. Yeah, but he didn't sound convinced. He released her hand and moved toward his team. They loaded into vehicles without fanfare. No speeches, no motivation. Just professionals going to work. The convoy engines revved higher. Squad leaders made final checks. Platoon sergeants reported ready status. 0745 hours. Colonel Hendricks emerged from the command post. He walked the line speaking briefly with company commanders, projecting confidence, showing the troops their leader was engaged and present. He reached Nora's position. Captain Blackwell, TOC is staffed and ready. Your station is prepared. Yes, sir. Monitor all tactical frequencies. If they call for air support, coordinate with available assets. F-16 flight is airborne at 0800. They'll maintain a high patrol pattern. Understood. Hendricks looked at the convoy, at the Marines making final preparations. His expression showed something Nora hadn't seen in the briefing room. Concern, maybe doubt. It's a good plan. He said it like he was trying to convince himself. Solid intelligence, appropriate force, clear objectives. Nora said nothing. These are good Marines, well-trained, well-led. Hendricks turned back to her. They'll be fine. Yes, sir. But her hand moved unconsciously to her vest, to the spot where her father's dog tags rested against her chest. Cold metal, heavy with memory. 0800 hours. The convoy rolled. Nora watched them go, dust rising behind the vehicles, turbine engines and diesel exhaust. The sound of organized violence preparing to move. 540 men, headed into a valley that looked too perfect to be safe. She counted vehicles. 37 in total, spaced for security, moving with the practiced discipline of a professional force. The last vehicle cleared the gate. The dust began to settle. From the motor pool, a single figure approached. Master Sarge Manhunt Dwight Sterling, 45 years old, crew chief, 23 years in the Air Force. Desert Storm veteran like her. The kind of NCO who knew the aircraft better than the engineers who designed it. Ma'am, he stopped at proper speaking distance. Sergeant Sterling, your bird's ready. Just finished the post-flight inspection from yesterday. Uploaded new targeting coordinates. Checked the cannon harmonics. She's good to go. I'm on TOC duty. I know. Sterling looked toward the gate where the convoy had disappeared. But just in case, if things change. Nora studied him. They'd flown together in 1991. He'd been her crew chief then too, young and scared and determined. Now he was weathered and competent and still determined. You think things will change? Sterling was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Ma'am, I've prepped aircraft for a lot of missions, seen a lot of plans, good ones, bad ones. The good ones feel solid. The bad ones feel, he gestured vaguely, off. This one feels off. The colonel says it's solid. The colonel's a good man, but he's never been shot at by people who actually knew what they were doing. Sterling met her eyes. You have. Not my call, Sergeant. No, ma'am, but if it becomes your call, he handed her a card. Aircraft status, fuel state, weapons load, everything she'd need for a rapid launch. I'll have her spinning and ready in 90 seconds. Nora took the card, slipped it into her pocket next to her kneeboard. 90 seconds. That's optimistic. I'm a motivated NCO, ma'am. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Sterling saluted and walked back to the flight line. Nora turned toward the TOC. Time to take her station, monitor radios, watch screens. Wait for something to go wrong while hoping it wouldn't. She paused at the entrance. In her pocket, her father's dog tags. His flight log, Sterling's aircraft status card. Her kneeboard was 16 years of calculated data. The convoy was 30 minutes gone, rolling toward Kandahar Valley, following the plan, trusting the intelligence, believing in the system. Nora pulled open the TOC door and stepped inside, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a clock started counting down. 2 hours, 40 minutes, until the walls closed, until 540 Marines learned the difference between the plan and reality, until someone had to make a choice. She sat at her station, put on the headset, keyed up the tactical frequencies, and waited, patient, watchful, ready, the way she'd been trained, the way her father had taught her, the way 16 years of experience had prepared her. When the moment came, she would know, and when she knew, she would act. Not for glory, not for vindication, not even for her career, for the simple reason that 540 lives mattered more than regulations, more than protocol, more than the opinion of people who'd never had to make the choice between the rule book and reality. The radio crackled with routine traffic, position reports, status checks, the normal rhythm of a movement to contact. Everything calm, everything normal, everything exactly as planned, for now. Nora adjusted her headset and opened her notebook to a blank page, ready to document what came next, ready to do what needed to be done, ready to choose. The Tactical Operations Center hummed with the sound of controlled tension. Banks of computer monitors glowed in the dim light. Radio speakers crackled with routine traffic. Air conditioning fought a losing battle against the heat generated by electronics and human bodies. Nora sat at her designated station, headset clamped over her ears, notebook open, pen in hand, eyes moving between three screens, tactical overlay drone feed communications log. 0830 hours. The convoy had been rolling for 30 minutes. On the main display, blue icons crawled across the digital map. Each icon represented a vehicle. Each vehicle carried between 8 and 15 Marines. The column stretched nearly 2 kilometers, moving at a steady 12 kilometers per hour on the dusty road that led to Condolar Valley. Colonel Hendricks stood at the center console, arms crossed, watching the same display. Around him, junior officers monitored their assigned sectors: intelligence, logistics, fire support, medical. Each man focused on his particular piece of the larger puzzle. The radio spoke in the clipped, professional tones of Marines on the move. Dragon 6, this is Dragon 2-1. At checkpoint Alpha, no contact, continuing movement. Dragon 2-1, Dragon 6, copy, maintain interval. Routine, textbook, exactly as planned. Nora pulled out her personal map, the one she'd marked during the briefing. The valley sketched from memory contour lines added from 16 reconnaissance flights, probable enemy positions marked with small red X's. She plotted the convoy's current position. Still 5 kilometers from the valley mouth. Still in relatively open terrain. Still safe. She looked at her watch, calculated, wrote a number in her notebook. 945. Valley entrance. 946. First probable contact point. 947. Kill zone fully activated. 2 hours and 57 minutes from now. She tapped her pen against the notebook. Waiting, watching, hoping she was wrong. Corporal Reed Thatcher sat 2 stations to her left. 23 years old, intelligence analyst, smart kid, sharp eyes. He'd been watching her since she sat down. Now he leaned over. Captain Blackwell, his voice low, not wanting to disturb the command net chatter. Nora looked up. Thatcher pointed at her map. Ma'am, your position plots don't match the official tactical overlay. You've got the convoy hitting the valley 15 minutes earlier than the timeline shows. Different calculation method. And these marks, he indicated her red X's, those aren't on our intelligence map. No, they're not. What are they? Nora studied the young corporal, deciding how much to say. Probable enemy positions, based on terrain analysis and historical engagement patterns in similar valleys. Thatcher frowned. But the intel assessment says minimal enemy presence, 20 to 30 fighters, light weapons. Intel assessments are built on what we can confirm, not what might be there. So you think there are more? Nora looked back at her map, at the 3 ridges that would command perfect fields of fire into the valley floor, at the natural choke point where the terrain narrowed and vehicles would have to bunch up, at the approaches that would be impossible to secure without dedicating hundreds of Marines to climb steep slopes under observation. I think insurgents don't usually set up ambushes in places where they'll lose. Thatcher was quiet for a moment. Then how many do you think are actually there? Enough to make it a problem. The corporal looked at his own screen, at the blue icons moving steadily toward the valley, at the intelligence overlay showing scattered red symbols representing estimated enemy positions. Numbers that seemed too small to be a real threat. Should I tell the colonel? He's already been told. In the briefing, he made his decision. But if you're right, Nora closed her notebook, met the young man's eyes. Corporal, here's what you need to understand. The colonel is following doctrine. He's using the intelligence provided by the system. He's executing a plan that looks good on paper. That's what good commanders do. Follow the process. Trust the system. And you're not doing that. I'm doing my job, monitoring, preparing, being ready if things change. She paused. Sometimes the system is right. Sometimes it's not. The trick is knowing which time this is. How do you know? Experience, instinct, and the willingness to be wrong and look like a fool if you are. Thatcher turned back to his screen, thinking, processing. Nora put her headset back on. The radio traffic continued. Position reports, status updates, everything nominal, everything proceeding according to plan. 0915 hours. The convoy approached the valley mouth. On the drone feed, she could see the terrain change. Open desert giving way to rising ground. Rocky ridges climbing on either side. the road narrowing as it entered the throat of the valley. Beautiful country, brutal country, the kind of place that ate armies if they weren't careful. All Dragon elements, this is Dragon 6, Colonel Hendrick's voice on the command net. We are entering the valley. Maintain tactical spacing. Weapons tight unless you have confirmed hostile contact. Let's keep this clean. The blue icons disappeared into the valley mouth one by one, like beads sliding into a funnel. Nora wrote another time in her notebook. 918. Valley entry confirmed. She underlined it twice. Then she opened her knee board, the one with her father's flight log. She didn't read it, just rested her hand on it. A talisman, a reminder. The radio chatter continued. Calm, professional. Marines doing their job. For now, the minutes crawled by. Nora watched the drone feed. The convoy stretched out inside the valley now. Lead elements approaching the center. Trail elements still near the mouth. Exactly the dispersal the plan called for. The ridges on either side showed nothing. No movement. No heat signatures on thermal. No visible positions. Empty. Quiet. Safe. Too quiet. 10-15 hours. On her personal map, Nora drew a small circle. First probable contact point. The place where the road curved and the valley narrowed, and any defender with half a brain would position their kill zone. The lead vehicles approached that curve. She held her breath without meaning to. The vehicles rounded the curve. Kept moving. No contact. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe the intelligence was right. Maybe this was just a routine clearance operation, and her paranoia was seeing threats that didn't exist. She exhaled slowly. 1,027 hours. 3 minutes past her calculated contact time. The convoy was deeper in the valley now, split into 3 distinct groups by the terrain. Led center trail, standard formation, good tactical spacing. Nora's eyes moved between screens. Drone feed, tactical overlay, communications log, everything quiet, everything. The radio exploded with noise. Contact, East Ridge, PKM fire. Every head in the TOC snapped toward the speakers. Dragon 2-3, taking fire, multiple positions, troops in contact. The tactical overlay erupted with red symbols. Enemy contact markers appearing on the East Ridge like a rash spreading across skin. Dragon 4-1 contact West Ridge, RP, GRPG. More red symbols. West Ridge now, flanking fire. On the drone feed, Nora saw it. Muzzle flashes stitching across the ridge lines. Small puffs of smoke from RPG launches. Tracer rounds arcing down into the valley floor. And more positions. Far more than 20 or 30 fighters. She counted quickly. 8, 10, 12 machine gun positions on the East Ridge alone. 6 more on the west. RPG teams in the draws. Mortar positions on the high ground. Coordinated. Pre-planned. Executed with precision. A professional ambush. The radio dissolved into controlled chaos. Squad leaders reporting contact. Platoon commanders directing fire. Company commanders trying to coordinate movement. All of it happening at once. All of it urgent. Dragon 6, Dragon 2-1, we are decisively engaged, unable to maneuver, requesting immediate fire support. Colonel Hendricks grabbed the radio handset. His face had gone pale. All Dragon elements, this is Dragon 6. Maintain defensive positions. Return fire. I say again, return fire and hold positions. Sir, we can't hold here. We're in a kill zone. Maintain position. Fire support is inbound. But it wasn't inbound, Nora could see that on her screen. The artillery battery was marking targets, but unable to shoot. The fire support officer at the next console shook his head. Sir, artillery cannot fire. Minimum safe distance is 200 meters. All our units are within that bubble. Danger close procedures require... I know the procedures, Hendricks snapped, then forcing calm back into his voice. What about air? Where's my F-16 flight? Lieutenant Ashford's voice came through on the air support frequency. Dragon 6, this is Sabre 1-1. We're overhead at 20,000 feet. We have visual on the valley. Sir, I'm seeing a lot of smoke down there. Can you engage? A pause. Too long. Negative, sir. Rules of engagement prohibit strikes within 200 meters of friendly forces. Your units are interspersed with enemy positions. I cannot get clearance to drop. Then get lower, use your gun. Sir, the valley is too narrow for a gun run at altitude. I'd have to come down to low level in the threat environment. Another pause. Ashford didn't want to say it, didn't want to admit it. The A-10 is better suited for this type of engagement, sir. The TOC went very quiet. All eyes turned toward Nora. She sat motionless, headset on, watching the drone feed, watching Marines take fire. watching the red symbols multiply as more enemy positions revealed themselves. On the radio, the casualty reports started coming in. Dragon 6, Dragon 2-1. We have casualties. 3 urgent, 2 routine. Requesting CASEVAC. Casualty evacuation. Dragon 444 urgent. Corpsman is hit. Dragon 3-2 taking accurate sniper fire. 1 KIA 2 IA. KIA killed in action. The numbers that didn't come back. Nora pulled her notebook toward her. Started logging the positions she could identify on the drone feed. Her hand moved automatically writing observations while her mind calculated solutions. ZU-23 anti-aircraft gun. North Ridge. Twin-barrel 23mm. Effective against helicopters and low-flying aircraft. Position grid reference 42 SPD 853-49721. PKM machine gun nests. East Ridge multiple positions. 7.62mm Soviet-era belt fed. 6 confirmed positions. Grid references logged. RPG-7 teams. Valley draws. Engaging vehicles at close range. 4 teams identified. DSHK, heavy machine gun. South Ridge, 12.7mm, covering the choke point, preventing vehicle movement. She wrote it all down, built a complete picture of the enemy disposition, overlaid it on her personal map. It matched her predictions almost exactly. Corporal Thatcher stared at her map, then at his screen, then back at her map. You knew, his voice barely above a whisper. You knew exactly where they'd be. Nora didn't answer. She was counting casualties now, logging each report as it came in. 6 KIA, 19 WIA urgent, 12 WIA routine. And the battle was only 8 minutes old. Colonel Hendricks paced behind the console, grabbing radios, demanding updates, ordering units to hold position to return fire to wait for support that wasn't coming. The artillery couldn't shoot. The F-16S couldn't engage. The Marines on the ground were trapped in a kill zone, taking casualties, burning through ammunition, waiting for someone to help them. Commander Vaughn's voice cut through the tactical net. Calm, steady, the voice of a man who'd been in worse situations and survived. Dragon 6, this is Trident Actual, his SEAL team call sign. We are observing enemy movement on the high ground. They're maneuvering to cut off the southern exit. If we don't break contact soon, they'll have us completely boxed in. Trident Actual, can you maneuver against those positions? Negative, we're 12 men against an estimated company-sized element. We can observe and direct fires, but we can't assault. What do you recommend? Vaughn's answer came without hesitation. We need precision, close air support. Surgical strikes on the enemy heavy weapons positions. Create a corridor. Allow our vehicles to bound out of the kill zone. Sir, we need an A-10. The words hung in the air. Hendricks looked at the screens, at the casualty count climbing, at the red symbols surrounding his blue icons, at the situation spiraling beyond what the plan had anticipated. Rules of engagement. Sir, Vaughn's voice hardened slightly. With respect, the ROE was written for a different scenario. We have troops in contact. We are taking casualties. We need help now. Nora's hands tightened on her notebook. Hendricks turned toward her station. Blackwell, can you do what he's asking? She met his eyes, saw the desperation there, saw a good man confronting the gap between the plan and reality. Yes, sir. The 200-meter rule. I can thread those ridges. GAU-8 cannon has surgical precision at 900 meters. I can hit the heavy weapons positions without endangering our forces. You're certain? Nora thought about the answer, about certainty, about the difference between confident and cocky, about 16 years of experience and thousands of hours in the cockpit and calculations that she'd run and rerun in her kneeboard. I'm certain I can make the shots. I'm certain it's the best option we have right now. I'm certain that if we don't do something more, Marines are going to die. Hendricks looked back at the screen. The blue icons were stationary now, fixed in place, unable to move forward, unable to retreat, taking fire from 3 sides. The casualty count updated, 8 KIA, 27 WIA urgent, 15 WIA routine, 50 casualties in 13 minutes. Sir, the fire support officer spoke up. Artillery still cannot engage. F-16 SCS still cannot get clearance. Medical is requesting CASEVAC for the urgent casualties, but we can't get helicopters in while the ridges are still controlled by enemy. Hendricks closed his eyes, just for a moment. A commander confronting the reality that his plan had failed, that his Marines were dying, that the system he trusted wasn't providing solutions. When he opened them, something had changed in his expression. Captain Blackwell, how long to? No, sir. Everyone turned. A major from the operations staff, Richard Kensington, 41 years old, career staff officer, 3 deployments, 0 combat flights. Sir, we cannot authorize close air support in violation of the 200-meter rule. The risk to friendly forces is too high. Captain Blackwell has been out of combat flight status for 6 months. She's not current. She's not qualified for this type of mission in the current threat environment. Nora's jaw tightened. Out of combat flight status. Because they'd stopped giving her combat missions. Because they'd decided she was too old. Too slow. Better suited for TOC duty and training roles. Circular logic that ended with Marines dying. Hendricks looked between them. The Major. Nora. The screen showing his Marines trapped and bleeding. What's your recommendation, Major? We follow procedure. We wait for artillery clearance. We coordinate a tactical withdrawal when feasible. We don't violate established rules of engagement on the basis of one pilot's assurance that she can make shots that doctrine says are too dangerous. Commander Vaughn says we need precision CAS now. Commander Vaughn is not the mission commander, sir. You are. And as operations officer, I am advising you that authorizing this would be a violation of standing orders. The radio crackled again. Dragon 6, Dragon 2-1. Enemy is advancing on our position. We are danger close to being overrun. We need support now. Gunfire in the background. Explosions. Screaming. Hendricks grabbed at the handset. Dragon 2-1, hold your position. Support is coming. But he didn't key the radio to give any orders that would make that true. Nora stood up. Every eye turned to her. Sir, give me the clearance. I can end this. One gun run. Take out the ZU-23. That opens the airspace for CASEVAC helicopters. Second run, eliminate the PKM nests on the East Ridge. That relieves pressure on the lead elements. Third run, hit the DSHK on the South Ridge. That clears the corridor for vehicle movement. 15 minutes. 3 runs. I can create the opening they need. Major Kensington stepped forward. And if you miss, if you hit our forces instead of the enemy, if you get shot down and we lose our only lieutenant and its pilot, then what, Captain? I won't miss. You can't guarantee that. No, but I can guarantee that if we do nothing more, Marines die. I can guarantee that sitting here monitoring radios while they bleed out in that valley will get people killed. I can guarantee that following procedure that doesn't account for the actual tactical situation is not a plan. It's suicide by regulation. The TOC had gone absolutely silent. Hendricks stared at her, a colonel who'd followed the rules his entire career, who'd trusted the system, who'd believed that proper procedure would keep his Marines safe. Captain Blackwell, you are not cleared to launch. You will remain at your station. That is an order. The words hit like physical blows. Nora stood very still. Every muscle in her body wanted to move, to run to the flight line, to strap into her aircraft and do what needed to be done. But she was a military officer, and that colonel had just given her a direct order. She sat back down, reached for her headset, and listened to Marines die on the radio. 1,047 hours. Casualties 10K. IA-34WIA urgent 18WIA routine. 1,053 hours. Casualties 12K in a 39YA urgent 22WIA routine. 1101 hours. A young Marine, maybe 19 years old, screaming for his mother while a corpsman tried to save him. The transmission cut off mid-scream. 13KIA. Nora's hands shook as she wrote the number in her log. Corporal Thatcher sat frozen at his station, tears running down his face, listening to friends die, unable to help. On the drone feed, she could see it all. Marines behind vehicles returning fire, corpsmen dragging wounded to cover, squad leaders trying to organize defense. All of it futile, all of it inadequate against a prepared enemy on commanding terrain. The ambush was perfectly executed. The insurgents knew exactly what they were doing. They'd lured a superior force into terrain that negated its advantages. They'd waited until the column was fully committed. Then they'd struck with overwhelming, coordinated fire. Textbook, professional, lethal. And the Americans, for all their technology and training and superior equipment, were losing. Because the technology couldn't shoot. The training didn't account for this situation. And the superior equipment was trapped in a valley being cut to pieces. Commander Vaughn's voice came through again. Still calm, still professional, but with an edge now. The edge of a man who could see the end coming. Dragon 6 Trident actual. Sir, I'm observing enemy mortar teams setting up on the North Ridge. When those tubes start firing, they will have bracketed our entire position. We will have nowhere to go. We need to break contact now. We need air support now. Or we need to prepare for significant casualties. Significant casualties, the military euphemism for mass death. Nora looked at her kneeboard, at her calculations, at her father's flight log, at the dog tags under her flight suit. She looked at the screen showing Marines dying. She looked at Colonel Hendricks standing rigid at the command console following the rules while his command bled out. And she made her decision. She stood up, removed her headset, picked up her helmet bag. "Captain Blackwell," Hendricks' voice sharp, "where are you going?" She turned to face him, met his eyes, saw the desperation, saw the fear, saw a good man trapped between doctrine and disaster. "To do my job, sir. I did not authorize you to launch." "No, sir, you didn't. If you walk out of this TOC, if you launch that aircraft without clearance, I will court-martial you. I will end your career. Do you understand?" Nora stood very still, let the words settle, let the weight of them register. Then she spoke quietly, clearly, with absolute certainty. "Then file the paperwork, Colonel. I'll sign it when I bring your Marines home." She turned toward the door. Major Kensington moved to block her path. "Captain, you cannot." "Get out of my way, Major. This is insubordination. This is—" Corporal Thatcher stood up suddenly, young, scared, determined. "Let her go." Kensington turned. "Excuse me, Corporal." "Sir, with respect, let her go. She's the only chance they have." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Nora stepped around the Major and walked toward the door. Hendricks' voice followed her. "Blackwell, if you're wrong, if you make this worse, if you get more Marines killed—" She stopped, hand on the door, didn't turn around. "If I'm wrong, sir, then court-martial me. But if I'm right and I don't try, then every one of those Marines who dies after this moment is on all of us. I can live with being wrong and trying. I can't live with being right and doing nothing." She pushed through the door into the sunlight. The heat hit her like a wall. She didn't slow down. Her boots pounded across the tarmac, helmet bag bouncing against her leg, flight suit already dark with sweat. Master Sergeant Sterling saw her coming. He was already moving before she reached the aircraft, running toward the starter cart, firing up auxiliary power. "How long, Sergeant?" 90 seconds, ma'am, like I promised." Nora threw her helmet bag into the cockpit, started her own external checks. No time for the full walk-around, just the critical items. Landing gear, flight controls, weapons. The GAU-8 cannon sat in its mount, 1,150 rounds of 30mm death. Ready. She climbed the ladder, dropped into the seat, started strapping in. Sterling appeared at the cockpit rail, headset cable in hand. "Radio's hot, ma'am. Weapons armed. Fuel full. Target coordinates loaded into the system from your kneeboard notes." Nora looked at him. "You uploaded my coordinates." "Started doing it an hour ago, ma'am. Figured you'd need them eventually." She wanted to say something. Thank him. Acknowledge what he was risking. But there wasn't time. "Clear me." Sterling snapped a salute. "Give 'em hell, Viper 7. The engines were already spooling up. The familiar whine of the TF-34 turbofans building power. The aircraft trembling with restrained violence. Nora ran through her abbreviated checklist. Hydraulics, good. Flight controls, good. Weapon systems, good. Good enough. She released the brakes. The tower frequency exploded in her headset. "Viper 7, you are not cleared for taxi. Return to parking immediately." "Immediately. This is a direct order." Nora switched off the tower frequency. She rolled onto the taxiway. Ahead, the runway stretched out. Empty. Waiting. Behind her, the TOC, Colonel Hendricks. The rules. The procedures. The safe choice. In front of her, a valley full of dying Marines. A tactical situation that doctrine couldn't solve. A problem that required someone willing to risk everything. Her father's voice whispered in her memory. When doctrine conflicts with reality, choose reality. Nora advanced the throttles. The Warthog accelerated. Slow at first. Heavy with fuel and weapons. Then faster. The centerline stripes blurring. The airspeed indicator climbing. 80 knots. 100. 120. The nose lifted, and Viper 7 launched into the Afghanistan sky, unauthorized and alone toward a valley where 540 Marines were fighting for their lives. The radio crackled with emergency traffic, casualty reports, requests for support, the sound of a battalion dying by inches. Nora climbed to 3,000 feet, leveled off, checked her systems one final time. Then she keyed the emergency frequency, the one that bypassed normal communications, the one that went directly to the Marines on the ground. Any call sign, this is Viper 7. I'm 10 minutes out. Mark your positions. I'm coming to get you. A pause. Static. Then Commander Vaughn's voice, rough with emotion. Viper 7? Is that you, Blackwell? Affirmative. Are you cleared hot? Nora looked at her instruments, at the valley ahead, at the path she'd chosen. Negative, but I'm coming anyway. Another pause. Then Vaughn spoke again, and this time there was something else in his voice, something that sounded like hope. Copy Viper 7. We'll mark targets. Come get some. Nora pushed the throttles forward. The Warthog surged ahead, and the real battle was about to begin. The valley opened before her like a wound in the earth. Nora flew low, 140 feet above ground level, 310 knots. The Warthog's shadow raced across the desert floor over rocks and scrub vegetation heading toward the mountains. She'd switched off every non-essential radio. No more tower traffic. No more Hendricks demanding she return. No more procedural objections from people safe in the TOC. Just the tactical frequency. The one carrying the voices of dying Marines. Her heads-up display painted the world in clean lines and symbols. Airspeed, altitude, heading, weapon status, all green, all ready. The knee board strapped to her thigh showed her hand-drawn map. The valley, the ridges, the positions she'd predicted. Red X marks that had proven horrifyingly accurate. She'd been right. The ambush was exactly where she'd known it would be. Exactly as professional as she'd feared. Exactly as deadly as her experience had warned. Being right felt like ashes in her mouth. The valley mouth appeared ahead. Dark cleft in the ridgeline, smoke rising from inside. The visible evidence of battle. Nora began her calculations. Wind speed 14 knots from the west. Temperature 87 degrees Fahrenheit. Altitude 8,400 feet means sea level. Air density reduced at this elevation. Ballistics would be affected. Rounds would fly flatter but lose energy faster. She adjusted her mental math. Compensated. Prepared. The radio crackled. Viper 7 Trident Actual. I have you on visual. Vapor trail coming from the west. Commander Vaughn's voice. Steady despite the gunfire audible behind him. First target ZU-23 anti-aircraft gun North Ridge. Grid 42. Sierra Papa Delta 8534-9721. That gun is preventing KSAVAC helicopters from approaching. Take it out and we can start evacuating casualties. Nora checked her tactical display. The grid coordinates matched her prediction almost perfectly. Copy Trident. I see it. 20 seconds. She armed the GAU-8 cannon. The weapons system came alive in her hands. Targeting reticle appearing on the HUD. Ballistic computer calculating. But she didn't trust the computer. Not completely. Not at these ranges with these wind conditions. She trusted her training, her experience. The thousands of hours she'd spent learning this aircraft's personality. Understanding how the gun breathed. How the rounds flew. How the platform responded. The valley walls rose on either side. Nora dropped lower, 100 feet now, hugging the terrain, using the ground to mask her approach, becoming invisible until the last possible second. The North Ridge appeared, rocky, steep, and there exactly where Vaughn had said the ZU-23 gun position. Twin barrels pointing skyward, crew scanning for threats, not expecting an attack from this angle, not expecting anyone crazy enough to come in this low. 890 meters. 18-degree dive angle. Crosswind compensation 3 degrees right. Nora's world narrowed. Nothing existed except the target, the aircraft, the geometry connecting them. Her father's voice whispered in memory. Steady breath. Ease the trigger. Let the shot surprise you. She squeezed. The GAU-8 roared. The sound was indescribable. A chainsaw made of thunder. 70 rounds per second. Each round depleted uranium. Each round capable of punching through tank armor. The recoil shuddered through the airframe. The aircraft slowed. Nora compensated automatically. Keeping the sight picture steady, walking the rounds onto target. 2.4 seconds. 52 rounds downrange. The gun position disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris. Metal fragments spinning through the air. The weapon destroyed. The crew silenced. Direct hit, Vaughn's voice carried something close to awe. ZU-23 is down Viper 7. That was a hell of a shot. But Nora was already banking hard, pulling 7Gs, her vision tunneling, G-suit inflating around her legs and abdomen, keeping blood in her brain, keeping her conscious. She rolled level, climbed slightly, scanned for threats, And that's when the missile warning receiver screamed. Sharp electronic tone. Urgent. Unmistakable. SA-7 Grail missile launch. Infrared seeking. Coming from her 6 o'clock. But the launch position made Nora's blood run cold. The coordinates on her threat display showed friendly territory. The missile was coming from inside FOB Blackthorn. Someone at her own base was trying to kill her. No time to think about it, only time to react. Nora punched the countermeasures button, flares ejected from dispensers, white-hot magnesium burning at 3,000 degrees, decoys for the heat-seeking missile. She broke hard left, pulled the aircraft into a vertical bank. 7 Gs again, 8, the airframe protesting. Warning tones, overstress, she ignored them. The missile tracked toward a flare, detonated 200 meters behind her, shrapnel peppering the air where she'd been seconds earlier. She rolled wings level, breathing hard, heart pounding. The threat was clear now. Someone didn't want her in this fight. Someone was willing to paint her with targeting lasers for enemy air defense. Someone was actively trying to stop her from saving those Marines. A traitor. At Blackthorn, in the TOC. Nora's jaw clenched. Fine. She'd deal with that later. Right now, 540 Marines were still taking fire. Still dying, still waiting for help. She switched off her targeting pod. Went completely dark electronically. No radar, no laser designator, no data links. Just Mark 1 eyeball and 16 years of experience. If they wanted to track her, they'd have to do it visually. And at 100 feet altitude at 300 knots in a narrow valley, good luck with that. Commander Vaughn came back on the radio. Viper 7. I saw that missile launch. Where did that come from? Friendly position. I've got a traitor problem. A pause, then Vaughn's voice turned hard. Dangerous. Copy. I'll handle it. You keep flying. We need you. Nora didn't have time to wonder how a SEAL commander would handle a traitor in the TOC. She had work to do. Trident call the next target. Roger, PKM machine gun nest, East Ridge, grid 42 Sierra Papa Delta, 862-79698. 68 meters from Dragon 2-1's position. They're pinned down hard, 3 urgent casualties that need CASVAC. 68 meters, well inside the 200-meter danger close radius. Exactly the kind of shot that doctrine said was impossible, that regulations prohibited, that Major Kensington would call reckless and dangerous. Nora checked her fuel, still good, checked her ammunition counter, 1,098 rounds remaining, checked her own confidence, solid. Copy, 68 meters. I can make that shot. She banked toward the East Ridge, lined up her approach, did the calculations. Range 920 meters, wind still 14 knots west, altitude delta 1,100 feet. Temperature effects, Coriolis effect at this latitude, spin drift on the rounds, every variable accounted for, every factor calculated. Every ounce of her training focused on one thing, putting rounds exactly where they needed to go and nowhere else. The PKM position came into view, sandbagged, well-constructed, muzzle flashing as the gunner poured fire down onto Marines behind a damaged MRAP. She could see them on the ground. Tiny figures. Desperate. One Marine trying to drag a wounded man to cover. Another returning fire with his rifle. Hopeless. Outgunned. Outmatched. 15-degree dive. Compensate for crosswind. Lead the target slightly to account for rounds as time of flight. Squeeze. The cannon spoke again. Shorter bursts this time. 1.8 seconds. 41 rounds. The PKM position erupted, sandbags disintegrating. The weapon tumbling end over end, the threat eliminated. The Marines on the ground didn't waste time celebrating. They grabbed their wounded and started moving, getting to better cover, making use of the openings she'd created. Scratch 1 PKM, Vaughn confirmed. Viper 7, you're threading needles down there. How the hell are you making these shots? Practice, Commander. Lots of practice. She pulled up, gained altitude, scanned for her next target. The valley was chaos below her, vehicles burning, smoke obscuring sight lines, tracer rounds crisscrossing the air. Marines fighting for their lives against an enemy that had every advantage except one. They didn't have Viper 7 overhead. Next target, Nora said, her voice calm, clinical, the voice of a professional doing her job. RPG team. South Ridge. They're setting up to engage Dragon 4-4. That's our medical vehicle. It's loaded with wounded. Nora's eyes snapped to the South Ridge, found the position. 2 men, one carrying the launcher, one loading a rocket, preparing to fire at a vehicle that couldn't shoot back. A vehicle marked with red crosses. A vehicle carrying bleeding Marines who'd already given everything. I see them. No fancy calculations this time. No careful setup. Just rage transformed into precision. She rolled inverted, pulled the nose down. 30-degree dive, the targeting reticle settling on the two figures. They saw her coming, started to scatter. Too late. Nora fired a single AGM-65 Maverick missile. The weapon dropped from the pylon. Motor ignited, accelerated to supersonic speed, tracked straight to the target. The explosion erased the RPG team, erased the threat, erased two people who'd made the mistake of pointing weapons at wounded Americans. Nora felt nothing. No satisfaction. No remorse. Just the cold assessment of a problem solved. She pulled out of the dive, climbed back to her patrol altitude, checked her weapon status. 5 Mavericks remaining, 1,057 rounds of 30 millimeter. Plenty of fuel, plenty of fight. The radio traffic was changing now. The desperate edge was fading, being replaced by something else, something that sounded like hope. Dragon 6 Dragons 2-1 were able to maneuver now, moving wounded to consolidation point. Dragon 4-4 casualties loaded and ready for CASVAC. We need those helicopters. And then a new voice, young, male, shaking with adrenaline and disbelief. Who the hell is that pilot? That's not a normal gun run. That's surgical. Another voice answered, older, grizzled, the voice of a man who'd seen things. That's Viper 7. That's Captain Blackwell. She flew in Desert Storm, killed 23 Iraqi tanks in one day. Legend says she can thread a 30 millimeter round through a keyhole at 1,000 meters. Is that true? Kid, you're watching it happen. What do you think? Nora ignored the chatter. She had more work to do. Commander Vaughn came back, professional, focused, but with an undertone of something she'd never heard from a SEAL before. Genuine amazement. Viper 7 Trident Actual, you're doing the impossible down there, but we've got a problem. I'm observing enemy mortar teams setting up on the North Ridge. When those start firing, they'll have our entire position bracketed. We need those tubes eliminated before they can engage. Mortars, indirect fire weapons, deadly accurate when properly employed. And from the high ground, they'd turn the valley floor into a killing field. Grid coordinates. Vaughn rattled them off. Nora plotted them on her mental map. 3 positions, separated by several hundred meters, each one requiring a separate attack run. 3 targets, 3 runs, 3 opportunities to get shot down by the DSHK heavy machine gun she knew was covering those positions. Copy all. Beginning attack run. She pushed the nose down, accelerated, headed back into the valley. This was where it got dangerous. This was where all the training and experience and calculated precision met the random chaos of combat. Where skill had to overcome luck. Where one mistake meant death. Nora's hands were steady on the controls, her breathing even, her mind clear. She'd been preparing for this moment for 16 years. Every training flight, every simulator session, every night spent memorizing ballistic tables and wind calculations, every moment of being dismissed and doubted and pushed aside, all of it leading here, to this valley, to these Marines, to this choice between procedure and survival. The first mortar position appeared. She lined up, calculated, fired. The GAU-8 roared. The position disintegrated. Second position, bank hard. Roll level, compensate for wind shift. Squeeze trigger. Another burst. Another elimination. Third position. But this time the DSHK opened up. Heavy 12.7 millimeter rounds walking toward her aircraft. Big enough to punch through the fuselage. Big enough to kill engines. Big enough to bring her down. Nora jammed the stick right. Brake turn. 7 Gs. The rounds passed behind her. She reversed, pulled nose up. Brought the GAU-8 to bear on the machine gun position. And fired. The DSHK fell silent. Permanently. She climbed out. Breathing harder now. Sweat running down her face inside the helmet. G-suit still tight around her legs. On her threat panel, a new warning. Engine number 2 running hot. She'd taken some damage. Shrapnel or a glancing hit. The engine was still producing power, but the temperature was climbing. Acceptable. She could work with it. She'd flown damaged aircraft before. Mortar positions eliminated, she reported. Voice still calm, still professional. Viper 7 is still mission capable. Vaughn's response came fast, urgent, different from before. Viper 7, break off your attack. I say again, break off. We have a situation. Nora's eyes snapped to her tactical display. What situation? What had changed? Then she heard it. A new voice on the command net, angry, authoritative. Colonel Hendricks. All call signs, all call signs. Captain Blackwell is not authorized for close air support. She launched without clearance. She is in violation of direct orders. All ground units will cease directing her fires. Viper 7, you are ordered to return to base immediately. The radio went silent, stunned silence. Then Commander Vaughn came back, his voice carefully controlled. But underneath, Nora could hear the fury. Dragon 6 Trident Actual. With respect, Sir Captain Blackwell has eliminated 12 enemy positions in the last 8 minutes. She has created the conditions for Casevac. She has prevented our position from being overrun. I strongly recommend we allow her to continue. Your recommendation is noted, Commander. But this is not a democracy. She disobeyed a direct order. She violated rules of engagement, and I will not condone that behavior, regardless of the outcome. Nora listened, hands still on the controls, eyes still scanning for targets. She understood what Hendricks was doing. He was a colonel, a career officer, a man who'd built his entire life on following the rules and trusting the system. And she'd just proven that sometimes the rules were wrong and the system failed. That was a hard truth for a man like Hendricks to accept, especially in front of his entire command, especially when accepting it meant admitting his decisions had gotten Marines killed. So he was doubling down, reasserting authority, proving he was still in command, even if it killed more of his Marines. Lieutenant Ashford's voice cut in, the F-16 pilot, the one who'd called her a dinosaur. Dragon 6 Sabre 1-1, I'm still overhead. I've been watching Captain Blackwell's gun runs. A pause, then words that must have cost him something to say. Sir, she's making shots I can't even set up for, threading 30mm rounds through 40-meter gaps at 300 knots. If you pull her off the station now, people are going to die. Your opinion is noted, Lieutenant, but my decision stands. All units cease directing fires for Viper 7. Nora banked away from the valley, climbed to a safe altitude, circled. Below her, the battle continued. Marines were moving now, using the breathing space she'd created, consolidating positions, loading casualties, preparing for extraction. But they weren't safe yet. There were still enemy positions on the ridges, still guns that could fire down into them, still threats that could turn evacuation into massacre. She checked her fuel, 30 minutes remaining, checked her ammunition, 943 rounds, checked her resolve, unshaken. The radio crackled again. A new voice, one she recognized. Corporal Reed Thatcher, the young intel analyst from the TOC. His voice was shaking, scared, but determined. Viper 7, this is Blackthorn, TOC. I have information for you. Hendricks in the background. Corporal Thatcher, get off that radio immediately. Thatcher ignored him, words tumbling out fast, before he could be stopped. Ma'am, we found the traitor, Major Silas Drummond, logistics officer. He was feeding targeting data to enemy, painting you with lasers for their air defense. Commander Vaughn's team has him in custody. He confessed, said his brother died in a friendly fire incident, blamed the military. This was revenge. A pause, sounds of struggle. Then Thatcher again, speaking even faster. Captain Blackwell, everyone in this TOC except the Colonel and Major Kensington wants you to keep flying. The Marines on the ground need you. We all know it. The Colonel knows it too. He's scared of what it means if he's wrong. The transmission cut off. Thatcher had said his piece. Probably just ended his career. Definitely just earned himself an Article 15 non-judicial punishment at minimum. But he'd given her the truth. Nora circled higher, thinking, processing. She disobeyed orders, launched without authorization, violated rules of engagement. Everything Hendricks said was true. By every regulation in the book, she should return to base, land, accept the consequences. But below her, Marines were still in danger, still vulnerable, still depending on her, and in her vest against her chest, her father's dog tags were cold metal, reminding her of the choice he'd made, the wrong choice. Following orders he knew would get him killed. She'd promised at his grave that she'd never make that mistake. She keyed the radio, emergency frequency, the one that bypassed Hendricks, the one that went straight to the Marines on the ground. Trident Actual Viper 7, what do you need? Vaughn's response was immediate, grateful. We need that corridor kept open. We've got Casevac birds inbound, but there are still enemy positions covering the landing zones. We need suppression. Give me targets. And Vaughn did. Grid coordinates, threat assessments, priority of fires. Nora rolled back toward the valley. Dove back into the fight, And for the next 27 minutes, she became something more than a pilot, more than a captain, more than a woman proving she still belonged. She became the angel of death and salvation, destroying enemies with surgical precision, creating corridors through the case, holding the door open while helicopters landed and lifted off. While wounded Marines were loaded onto birds, while the battalion that had been written off as lost started coming home, her damaged engine temperature kept climbing, warning lights illuminated, hydraulic pressure dropping, flight controls getting heavier. The aircraft was dying around her, but it kept flying because she willed it to fly, because Marines needed it to fly, because stopping was not an option. She made run after run, eliminated position after position, PKM nests, RPG teams, sniper, hides, command bunkers, ammunition caches. Every target Vaughn called, she destroyed. The radio traffic changed again, the hopeless desperation gone, replaced by coordination, organization, the sound of a battalion that was going to survive. Dragon 6, Dragon 2-1, all wounded loaded. We're mobile. Dragon 4-4 case vac complete. We have them all. Dragon 3-2 bounding south, following Viper 7's corridor. And then Commander Vaughn, his voice rough with emotion. Dragon 6 Trident actual. All SEALs accounted for. All Marines accounted for. We are ready for final extraction. A different voice now. A sergeant, young, raw, speaking to everyone and no one. We should all be dead. That was a perfect ambush. They had us. They had us cold. And that pilot saved every one of us. Another voice, older, a first sergeant with 30 years in. That's not just any pilot. That's Viper 7. That's Captain Nora Blackwell. Remember that name. Remember it when they try to tell you she was wrong to fly. Remember it when they try to court-martial her. Remember that she chose us over her career. Nora heard it all, said nothing, just kept flying, kept watching, kept making sure the evacuation went smoothly. The last helicopter lifted off, loaded with the final group of Marines, rising up through the corridor she'd created and maintained. Commander Vaughn's voice came one last time. Viper 7 Trident actual. Final count 540 souls. 13 fallen recovered. 0 left behind. You gave us the miracle we needed. 0 left behind. The words hit harder than she'd expected. Nora's vision blurred for a moment. Not from G-forces this time. From something else. Something human and vulnerable and absolutely unprofessional. She blinked it away. Keyed the radio. Glad I could help, Commander. Viper 7 is RTB. Returning to base, she turned toward Blackthorn. The damaged engine was failing now. Temperature redlining, oil pressure dropping. She shut it down before it could catch fire. Feathered the propeller. Flying on one engine. Hydraulics degraded. Flight controls heavy. Fuel low. But the hardest part wasn't the damaged aircraft. The hardest part was going back to face what she'd done. Going back to Colonel Hendricks. To the court-martial he'd promised. To the end of her career. She'd saved 540 Marines, and it was going to cost her everything. The runway appeared ahead, emergency vehicles already positioned, fire trucks, ambulances, everyone expecting a crash landing. Nora lined up on final approach. One engine, manual flight controls, no hydraulic assist, like flying a truck with the power steering failed. She nursed it down, held the center line, flared at the last moment. The main gear touched, smooth, professional, perfect. The aircraft rolled out. She applied brakes, brought it to a stop, shut down the remaining engine. Silence. After 33 minutes of continuous combat, the silence felt alien. Nora sat in the cockpit for a long moment, hands still on the controls. Breathing, processing, coming down from the adrenaline high. Then she unbuckled, climbed out, stood on the wing, and saw them. 540 Marines lining the taxiway. Standing at attention, every man who'd been in that valley, every man she'd saved, and behind them walking toward her aircraft, Colonel Marcus Hendricks. His face was unreadable, his stride measured, his posture rigid with military bearing. Nora climbed down from the wing, stood at attention, waited for judgment. Hendricks stopped 5 feet away. His eyes moved over her, over the damaged aircraft, over the scorch marks and shrapnel holes, over the evidence of what she'd done. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled. But underneath, she heard something breaking. Captain Blackwell, you disobeyed a direct order. Yes, sir. You launched without authorization. You violated rules of engagement. You engaged in combat operations after being explicitly told to stand down. Yes, sir. A long pause. Hendricks' jaw worked. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Then his voice cracked. You saved 540 lives when I was prepared to let procedure kill them. Nora said nothing. There was nothing to say. I followed the book. Hendricks continued, his voice barely above a whisper now. I trusted the system. I believed that doing things the right way, the authorized way, would keep my Marines safe. And I was wrong. Catastrophically wrong. He looked past her at the Marines, at the men who were alive because she'd refused to follow his orders. If you hadn't disobeyed, if you hadn't launched. He couldn't finish the sentence. Nora stood straight, met his eyes, saw the torment there, saw a good man confronting the gap between what he believed and what was true. Colonel Hendricks came to attention, raised his hand, and rendered the sharpest, most precise salute she'd ever seen. A colonel saluting a captain, in full view of the entire battalion. A public acknowledgement that rank had been wrong and judgment had been right. Captain Blackwell, I was wrong, you were right, and every Marine standing here owes you their life. Before Nora could respond, Commander Vaughn stepped forward. He was still in combat gear, still covered in dust and cordite, still carrying the marks of battle. He came to attention beside Hendricks, saluted. Viper 7, the Valley owes you everything. And then one by one, all 540 Marines saluted. Not a sound, not a word. Just 540 hands raised in silent tribute to the pilot who'd refused to let them die. Nora stood frozen, overwhelmed, the weight of it crushing down on her. She returned the salute, held it, locked eyes with each man she could see. Then she lowered her hand and spoke quietly. I was just doing my duty, sir. Hendricks lowered his salute, stepped closer. When he spoke again, his voice carried across the silent tarmac. You did more than duty, Captain. You chose reality over doctrine. You chose lives over career. You chose what was right over what was authorized. That takes more courage than I showed today. He turned to address the assembled battalion. Marines, you witnessed something today. You witnessed what happens when one person has the courage to stand up when the system fails. Captain Blackwell will face a court of inquiry for her actions. That is procedure. That is required. But I want every one of you to remember what you saw. Remember who saved you. Remember that sometimes following orders is wrong and disobeying them is right. And remember that this woman made that choice knowing what it would cost her. Sergeant Marcus Webb stepped forward from the ranks. The squad leader who'd dismissed Nora as dead weight in the briefing. His face was streaked with dust and dried blood. His eyes were haunted. Sir, permission to speak. Hendricks nodded. Webb turned to Nora. His voice broke when he spoke. Ma'am, I called you washed up. Said you were past your prime. Said you didn't belong in combat anymore. He swallowed hard. I was wrong. You're not washed up. You're the only reason I'm alive to apologize. The only reason any of us are. Another Marine spoke up. Then another. Voices from the ranks, breaking protocol, breaking formation, speaking truth. You saved my life, ma'am. I watched you thread rounds between our vehicles. Impossible shots. Everyone perfect. We were dead. We were all dead. And you wouldn't let us die. The emotion spread through the formation like a wave. Marines who'd been silent, professional, controlled now openly weeping, embracing each other, celebrating survival they'd never expected. And through it all, Nora stood straight, accepting their gratitude, carrying their survival like a weight both terrible and sacred. Corporal Thatcher appeared from the TOC, his face pale. He walked straight to Nora, came to attention. Ma'am, I wanted to say what I did on the radio. I'd do it again. You needed to know about Major Drummond. You needed to know that we believed in you. You ended your career for me, Corporal. No, ma'am, I ended my career for them. He gestured at the Marines. Same reason you ended yours, because some things matter more. Nora looked at this young man, 23 years old, whole life ahead of him, thrown it away to give her information she needed. She extended her hand. Thatcher shook it, gripped tight, then stepped back. Lieutenant Cole Ashford walked forward. The F-16 pilot, the one who'd called her aircraft a dinosaur. His swagger was gone. His cocky certainty replaced with something else. Captain Blackwell? He stopped at proper distance. I owe you an apology. I said your platform was obsolete, that you were obsolete. I was an arrogant kid who didn't know what the hell I was talking about. You were doing your job, Lieutenant. No, ma'am, I was being a punk. You were doing your job. I watched every one of your gun runs from altitude. I couldn't have made those shots. Wouldn't have even tried. You operated at a level I didn't know existed. He came to attention, saluted. It would be an honor to fly on your wings someday, if you'll have me. Nora returned the salute. We'll see, Lieutenant. Learn some humility first. Then we'll talk. The corner of Ashford's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Yes, ma'am, I'm working on it. The crowd began to disperse. Marines headed to debrief, to medical checks, to hot showers and hot food and the rituals of coming back from the edge. But they all took a moment to pass Nora, to touch her shoulder, to nod, to acknowledge. She stood there and received it all. Every gesture, every glance, every wordless thank you. Finally, only a few people remained. Hendricks, Vaughn, Master Sergeant Sterling, and standing slightly apart military police and JAG officers, the legal machinery preparing to process her violations. Hendricks saw them too. Captain Blackwell, there will be a court of inquiry. I cannot prevent that. You violated direct orders. The system requires accountability. I understand, sir. But I will testify. I will tell them what happened, what you did, why it mattered, and I will recommend that you be cleared of all charges. Thank you, sir. Vaughn stepped forward, his face hard, determined. I'll testify too, Captain. So will every one of my SEALs. So will every Marine in that valley. They're going to hear the truth. The JAG officer approached. A major, careful, professional. Captain Blackwell, I'm Major Patricia Sinclair, Judge Advocate General's Corps. You need to understand your legal position. You face potential charges of disobeying direct orders, unauthorized use of military aircraft, violations of rules of engagement, and reckless endangerment. These are serious, career-ending at minimum, potentially criminal. Nora met her eyes. I understand. However, Major Sinclair's expression shifted slightly. I've already received 127 sworn statements from Marines in that valley, all testifying that your actions saved their lives, all requesting clemency. I've never seen anything like it in my career. What does that mean? It means the court-martial you're facing isn't the foregone conclusion Colonel Hendricks thought it would be when he threatened you. It means you have 540 character witnesses. It means this is going to be complicated. 4 months later, the investigation concluded. The hearing room was packed, every seat filled. Marines in dress uniforms, officers and enlisted, JAG attorneys, media representatives, everyone who wanted to witness the judgment of Viper 7. Nora sat at the defendant's table, dress blues, ribbons on her chest, hair pulled back, face calm. The investigating officer read the findings. After extensive review of the events of October 14, 2007, this board finds that Captain Nora Blackwell did indeed violate direct orders, engage in unauthorized combat operations, and exceed the parameters of established rules of engagement. Nora's jaw tightened. Here it came, the end of everything. However, this board also finds that Captain Blackwell's actions directly resulted in the preservation of 540 United States Marines who would otherwise have suffered catastrophic casualties. Her tactical judgment was sound. Her execution was flawless. Her courage was exemplary. The officer paused, looked directly at Nora. It is the finding of this board that Captain Blackwell's actions, while technically in violation of orders, were both necessary and appropriate given the tactical situation. She is hereby cleared of all charges. Furthermore, she is recommended for the Silver Star for valor in combat. The room erupted. Marines on their feet, cheering, applauding. Nora sat very still, absorbing it. 16 years of service, 16 years of being pushed aside, 16 years of waiting for the moment when experience and instinct would matter more than age and politics. And when that moment came, she'd been ready. Major Sinclair leaned over, spoke quietly under the noise. There's more, Captain. The Air Force is implementing a new doctrine. They're calling it the Blackwell Protocol. It authorizes experienced pilots to exercise tactical discretion when ground commanders are in extremis and traditional support is unavailable. Your name, your judgment. Codified into regulations. The Blackwell Protocol. Nora looked at her hands, at the scars from cockpit edges and hard landings, at the evidence of 16 years of flying and fighting. Her father had died following orders he knew were wrong. She'd almost died disobeying orders she knew were right. And now her name would be attached to a doctrine that said sometimes the human judgment of an experienced operator mattered more than the rigid application of rules. She thought her father would have appreciated the irony. 3 weeks after the hearing, Nora stood in front of a classroom. Not a court, not an inquiry, a classroom. 24 young pilots, fresh from flight school, eager, confident, convinced they knew everything. She looked at them and saw herself at 22, saw Lieutenant Ashford before the valley taught him humility, Saw every cocky kid who thought technology and youth were enough. Welcome to Advanced CAS Tactics, she began. I'm Major Nora Blackwell, and before we start, I want you to understand something. Everything you learned in flight school was important. Everything you learned about procedures and regulations and doctrine was necessary. But it wasn't sufficient. She walked to the front of the room, picked up a knee board, her knee board, the one with 16 years of hand-calculated data. This is what's going to keep you alive. This is what's going to make you effective, not the computers, not the technology, not the procedures. Your brain, your experience, your willingness to think when the situation demands it and act when action is required. She opened the knee board, showed them the pages, the calculations, the notes, the accumulated wisdom of thousands of hours. You're going to learn how to make these calculations, how to read terrain, how to assess threats, how to employ your weapons with precision that technology cannot match. And you're going to learn when to follow orders and when to question them. A hand went up. A young woman, Lieutenant Bryn Adler, 24 years old, eager, smart, familiar fire in her eyes. Ma'am, they said you saved 540 Marines by disobeying orders. How do we know when to do that? Nora looked at her, saw herself, saw the next generation trying to navigate the impossible space between duty and judgment. You'll know, Lieutenant, when the moment comes when lives hang in the balance. When the book says one thing and your training says another, you'll know. The question is whether you'll have the courage to act on it. She set down the knee board, picked up a different one, new, empty pages. This is yours now, Lieutenant Adler. Start filling it. Start building your knowledge. Start preparing for the moment when you'll have to choose. Bryn took the knee board, held it like the precious thing it was. Thank you, ma'am. Nora looked at all of them. These young pilots who would carry forward what she learned, who would face their own impossible choices, who would have to decide when courage meant following orders and when it meant refusing them. One more thing, she said quietly. This job will ask everything of you. It will demand your skill, your courage, your judgment, your willingness to sacrifice. And sometimes it will demand you choose between your career and doing what's right. When that happens, I can't tell you what to choose, but I can tell you this: sleep matters. Being able to look yourself in the mirror matters. Knowing you did everything possible to bring people home alive matters. The rest is just noise. She paused, looked at each of them. Viper 8 requesting taxi clearance, she said softly. Bryn Adler stood, came to attention, smiled. Cleared to taxi Viper 8, the sky is yours. And Nora Blackwell, the pilot they'd tried to ground, the captain who'd refused to let 540 Marines die, the woman who'd chosen reality over doctrine, smiled back. Because the legacy was secure, the knowledge was passed down, the next generation was ready, and somewhere she thought her father was proud. The classroom door opened. Commander Garrett Vaughn stood there, still a SEAL, still carrying the quiet competence of men who operated in shadows. Major Blackwell, got a minute? She stepped outside. Vaughn looked uncomfortable, not his usual confident self. Just got word from JSOC. They're putting together a new training program, integrating ground and air more closely, teaching SEALs and pilots to work together in high-risk environments. They want you to run the pilot side. I'm already teaching. This is different. This is Tier 1, the sharp end, the missions that don't exist. He paused. I recommended you because I've seen what you can do when the bullets are real and the system fails. That's who we need training our people. Nora thought about it, thought about going back to the shadows, to the places where judgment mattered more than rank, where results mattered more than procedure. I'll think about it, Commander. Vaughn nodded, started to leave, stopped. By the way, those 540 Marines, they're calling themselves the Viper Battalion now. Unofficial, but it's stuck. Every one of them tells the story. Every one of them remembers. You're not just in the history books, Major. You're a legend. He walked away. Nora stood alone in the corridor, thought about legends, about stories, about the difference between mythology and truth. The truth was simpler than the legend. She'd been a pilot who refused to let people die when she had the skill to save them. She'd chosen reality over doctrine. She'd paid the price and earned the vindication. And now she would make sure the next generation understood that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing were the same thing. She walked back into the classroom, back to the young pilots waiting to learn, back to the work of turning students into warriors. Outside, the sun set over Nellis Air Force Base. A 10S flew practice patterns, the familiar sound of GAU-8 cannons echoing across the desert. And somewhere in the sky, Viper 7's legacy soared on. Zero left behind. Always.